The coalition now has 10 parties. Former Judge John Hlophe has joined the MK as its parliamentary leader. And South Africa, at the time of shooting, is no closer to having a cabinet. And Gauteng is still in disarray. Let's analyze it all in this episode of SMWX. Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX, where we analyze South African politics. Now, there is so much happening in this country. The poor rand, the markets don't even know what to do. Should they be up? Should they be down? Should they be in the middle? At this point, the markets need therapy. The rand needs therapy. The nation needs therapy because we have been on a roller coaster ever since this election started. And it looks like that roller coaster still has many twists and turns ahead. Welcome to the channel again. Thank you so much for helping build this platform. Today we're going to talk about a few things. I want to give you an update of what has happened since our last episode and since we last chatted together. Specifically, the joining of these new parties onto the Multiparty Coalition government, as well as what's been happening in opposition ranks with MK and EFF as well. Following that, I just want to look at some of the substance of this coalition. The ANC's released some documents which purport to give us more detail on exactly how this government is going to work. And I'm going to look into those details to show that there is lots of space for disagreement, gridlock, and deadlock that I'm really worried about. And I think this moment is already showing us what could come in the future, which is an indecisive government which can't make decisions quickly. And then finally, I want to break down just the provincial and even the local picture, because as the national government continues to engage in debate about the modalities of its decision-making, how the cake of power should be carved up, there's also a provincial and a local government picture that I suspect will be unfolding in the weeks and months ahead too. So let's begin with what has been happening since we last spoke. So we last spoke when it looked like the GNU was entering into ICU. And it's not clear whether it has emerged from ICU and is going into recovery, or whether it is critical but stable. Now, what we really saw, and what I think is important because there's a lot of noise, what I think you need to focus on is a number of new parties have signed up to this statement of intent surrounding this new coalition, and it's taken the number to 10 new parties. Now, which parties have joined? We've seen Al Jamaa, who said they wouldn't join anything with the DA joining. We've seen the UDM, who seemed at least to be skeptical on an ANC-DA plus coalition earlier joining. And Rise Mzansi, who've been very quiet about where they stand on this coalition government, have also joined. So this has taken the number of parties without the DA to 200 seats in parliament, or exactly half of the vote. And then, of course, you've got the DA, which still seems to be in, but there is a big fight clearly going on about exactly how much power the DA deserves in the national government and cabinet, but also in Gauteng, I suspect. So how do we analyze the fact that we've got all these new parties that have joined? Well, I think there are a number of things that we need to look at to make sense of this. The first thing is that the ANC is clearly trying to pivot away from being reliant on the DA to make its government work. So what is happening here is that the ANC is bringing in more and more small parties to the point where it won't need either the DA, the EFF, or MK to have a parliamentary majority. Now, that parliamentary majority would be incredibly unstable and unmanageable because it would just get you over the majority. So the ANC could say bring in one or two more parties into this coalition agreement, say BOSA or the ACDP, and then they would be at 205, 206 seats, and you only need 201 for a majority. But that's really unstable for two reasons. Firstly, no one can get sick when Parliament is voting, right? Because there are no replacement MPs. If someone doesn't turn up to a vote, then you lose that vote and the opposition vote grows in return. So you don't want to have a situation where every time there's an important vote in Parliament, a motion of no confidence, for instance, you need to make sure that 5 people do not get sick, for example. The other reason it's extremely unstable without the DA is that managing 8 parties plus the ANC just becomes an unrideable horse. The ANC gets pulled in all kinds of different directions by actually very small parties, and you need to make sure everyone agrees, because if one small party disagrees with you, then they can potentially collapse any policy proposal that you have. And so it's a very unwise and unmanageable idea for the ANC to go into a multi-party knife-edge coalition, shall we call it. But having said that, it does mean that the ANC has the negotiating position with the DA to say, look, we actually don't need you. The DA, of course, can turn around, which they probably are doing, and saying, okay, cool, good luck. You can go the minority government route, or you can have this very unworkable multi-party coalition. But just know that if that's going to be your fallback option, it's not the kind of fallback option that you want to have. So I think that's the reason why the ANC has brought in all these new parties, because you'll remember when we spoke last time, the DA was really asserting its ability to control, or at least exercise its part of a veto on government decision-making. Of course, the ANC had a reciprocal veto which it could rely on. But both parties now seem to be moving away from that language, even though ultimately I still think when the rubber hits the road, that's what's going to happen if the DA and the ANC are in coalition together. So that's the first thing I think we need to understand about this. But the second worry I have about all these small parties coming into government, whether the DA stays or not, is that one thing voters definitely did not ask for, and one thing that was certainly not on the ballot this election, was having a bunch of ideologically disagreeing small parties who have outsized influence being able to wag, being the tail that wags the dog of government. Now, we've already seen in Joburg that voters and the nation, quite frankly, don't like when small parties get to determine and dictate and hold ransom the agenda of government. And worse, we could see this at national level, where we have parties with one seat being given a seat at the table when parties with many more seats don't have that seat at the table. And those parties could make unreasonable demands, knowing that they exercise leverage over the government. Now, they may not be able to exercise leverage in terms of having a majority in the cabinet, but they create headaches for the government, because what if one small party that's in government now, goes out publicly and criticizes the government, or even leaks information about the government that the government doesn't want the public to know about? You just have to keep monitoring and keep tabs on these small parties all the time, and they get way more power than voters actually gave them. So I do think that one worrying consequence of this emerging coalition is that we are going to have this collection of small parties who are really led by their stomachs more than their ideologies. And if they are led by their ideologies, those ideologies are mutually incompatible, and we're going to have the bigger parties trying to constantly reconcile these small parties which are able to hold the nation hostage. And I, for one, am distinctly unamused by this kind of future. And I already have serious worries about all these small parties coming together and how much power they're going to be given. But there's another similar problem, which is that these parties should be in opposition. They didn't get the kinds of votes that are necessary to govern. So now we also have a weakened and a diminished opposition bench. where these parties, I was looking forward to hearing from them criticizing the government. For example, the UDM has been a really critical voice in the Ramaphosa era, making sure that the president is held to account, for example, on Phala or on other questions. But now, suddenly, the UDM is going to be part of this government, and I'll be interested to see to what extent that blunts their capacity to play an opposition role. If they actually get a seat in cabinet, they will be torn between whether they are loyal to the government or loyal to the opposition voice. And so, in general, I worry about the quality of a diminished opposition bench in parliament if 10 parties are going to be part of government and feel as if they're loyal to government. And I also worry about the extent to which the ANC can use patronage to keep these small parties quiet, even when something obviously unlawful happens, which we know happens with the ANC all the time. So you'll see a party like the NFP, when they were in parliament, because they had a little side arrangement with the ANC, they would excuse corruption all the time. And the ANC would laugh as they heard the NFP excusing corruption on the ANC's behalf. Are these small parties going to do that? Because if they are, then they need to watch out, because they could get a serious dent in the next election. In fact, I think that's kind of what happened with a party like the Good Party, led by Patricia de Lille. They came into parliament with 2 seats, but then they joined cabinet and suddenly they started apologizing for ANC misdemeanors. For example, they abstained in the Phala vote, and then they got 1 seat only in this election. I think the electorate clearly doesn't want opposition parties that moonlight as ANC sidekicks. And that's also what we might see in this new coalition arrangement. The final worry, of course, is that we clearly have a coalition which is sprawling now with any number, 10 or more ideologies. And I really battle to see how this government reconciles all those contending viewpoints on any question whatsoever, whether that is the minimum wage or whether that is what the budget should look like, whether that's foreign policy, whether that's macroeconomic policy, whether that is social policy or the social safety net. I just don't see how these 10 different ideologies all come together. And I really worry about the coherence of government. You know, are these cabinet meetings going to be endless speeches from politicians from 10 ideologies putting their viewpoints across? And just how much is that going to really hamper government's flexibility and its agility? Look, on the other hand, of course, this is a more representative government. It certainly represents a lot of different viewpoints. And if the DA stays into this coalition, it will represent 287 seats. So it'll be an extremely healthy majority in terms of being able to pass things through parliament. The question is, will it be able to agree internally on what needs to be passed through parliament? So what you could get is a very powerful coalition of forces within parliament. And yes, that will be able to achieve a lot. The question is, will they be able to agree on what to achieve? How many coalition partners does it take to change a light bulb? At this point, none, because they are still trying to agree on the modalities of how to buy the light bulb, and then who will hold the stepladder, and who will climb up the stepladder, and who will get to screw the light bulb in. And finally, they are not agreed on who gets to press the switch to see if the light bulb is actually working. Welcome to the GNU. Fam, I just wanted to interrupt this episode to let you know the 4 ways you can help SMWX. Way number 1, you can invite me to speak at your institution or company. Way number 2, you can advertise on this channel. Way number 3, you can become a member of this channel. The link to the membership is down below. And number 4, you can buy merch, that's books or hoodies. Now let's get back to the episode. All our contact details are in the description box below. So that's my worry about this talk of the new parties. However, We've also got developments on the opposition benches. Now, the MK party is the country's official opposition, it looks like. It's the biggest political party that's not in government unless the DA pulls out. And my, we've seen impeached Judge John Hlophe joining the MK and becoming the leader of its parliamentary operation. Now, of course, such a move is going to irk and anger News 24 readers who are already frothing at the mouth just at the mere existence of MK. And of course, there are people who even might be sympathetic to MK who are worried about the way in which it looks like this party, outside of Judge Hlophe, but with suggestions that someone like Zizi Kodwa could be an MP, although that hasn't been proven yet. We'll see what happens on Tuesday. But the way in which this party is willing to embrace those who have clouds over their heads. However, Judge Hlophe, just from a strategic perspective, is going to bring a wealth of legal and procedural knowledge to this MK bench. And I think we'll put paid to this idea that MK is just a grouping of angry and disorganized Zuma supporters, right? Judge Hlophe was Judge President of the Western Cape Division. And remember that whenever Parliament has a dispute, that dispute often goes to the Cape Town High Court first, right? The High Court in Cape Town. And he was Judge President of that division. So he will have seen a number of the legal workings of Parliament. And he will understand, to a great extent, maybe more than any MP in many ways, having actually been a judge, the interface between the legislature and the judiciary and how that works around Parliament. So I do think that Judge Hlophe will play an interesting role. I'm quite interested to see how MK will maneuver. What I think is good is that MK is slowly moving away from this electoral dispute stuff, even though there is a case before the electoral court now, and that must, work itself out, let the process unfold. But from a political strategy perspective, I really think this election stuff is a diversion. And the country needs opposition parties, and we sadly can't choose our opposition parties, but every opposition party now needs to get onto the substance. They need to get onto the substance of criticizing what the government does in a constructive way and presenting a credible alternative. And that's what all opposition parties need to do. It's clear on the EFF side of the spectrum that the EFF is not going to join the GNU if the DA is there, or if the Freedom Front Plus is there. And so once again, the ANC is in that choice and in that bind that we've spoken about. And the only way I see the EFF joining such a coalition, which would also be tough for them for many different reasons, largely because they've criticized it a lot up to now, is if the DA and the Freedom Front Plus were to walk away. Which means that the ANC could be in a tough position if the DA walks away. And this is the reason why I think the DA is negotiating very hard with the ANC. Because they can say to the ANC, we're walking. We'll leave you with a minority government or an unstable coalition. And then we, the EFF and MK, become the opposition. Or you can become a partner with the EFF, but just know that the EFF is going to extract serious concessions, as is their right. Because the ANC would be coming back to the EFF with its tail between its legs and saying, oh, well, we couldn't find agreement with the DA. Can we get agreement with you? And then the EFF will say, oh, so you're coming back to us now, having rejected us initially. Okay, we want this and this and this. And maybe they'll try to extract similar concessions to the DA, in which case the ANC will be in a bind itself. So the ANC has to make a choice, and I've been saying this for weeks and weeks, and I'm really worried that I'm going to be saying this for years and years. Because what we ultimately need now is a decisive government, a government which can actually make a bold decision. I actually don't care what the decision is at this point. Because if the ANC just wanted to go with the DA, they should have just gone with the DA, created a program and implemented it, and trusted that that implementation would convince the nation. If they wanted to go with the EFF or MK, they should have just done it, decided. And what shocks me is how flat-footed all the parties, quite frankly, look. I mean, we knew we were going into this coalition era. I would have thought that, for example, the ANC would have said, look, if we're at 40 to 45, we're doing this. If we're at 45 to 50, we're doing this. If we're below 40, we're doing this. And had a clear plan. But it looks like the ANC is making this up as they go along. And because they are making it up as they go along, it is forcing all the opposition parties to make it up as they go along. And no one seems to be able to get a handle on this, take the government by the reins and actually just drive the agenda forward, because we haven't even got to the point of delivery yet. Now, secondly, a second bucket of questions is, what is the substance of this emerging coalition actually going to be? Now, the ANC recently released some documents which purported to give some clarity on things like what is the minimum program of this coalition, what are the founding principles of this coalition, and exactly what are the decision-making mechanisms that will really be lie behind this coalition. But I'm afraid that these documents don't really shed light on any of those three subjects. Because it seems to me that there are really two competing visions that are clashing right now. The one is an ANC vision and the other is a DA vision. The ANC has this vision of what they keep trying to call a GNU, which is of this government of many different parties, where the ANC becomes the leader of all of these different parties. It really is the central player, and it is the party that effectively dictates the agenda, but these other parties become decorations on that agenda, and they get buy-in from different constituencies outside the ANC to push that agenda forward. But the ANC is still the main player. It still kind of plays the same role that it has in South African politics up to now, except it just has to consult with a few more parties. So that's the ANC vision. The DA vision is of an ANC-DA collaboration where those two parties are in the driving seat, and there are other parties around them that play the role of the decoration. They obscure the fact that there is an ANC-DA coalition, these small parties, and they also get buy-in from different constituencies for this ANC-DA coalition. But ultimately, the DA wants to be able to exercise a very strong, if not veto, then voice against any unilateral ANC decisions. They want a lot of say in cabinet. They want a lot of say in the provinces, the DA. And it seems to me that the parties just can't marry these two visions. And in some ways, both visions are unrealistic. Because on the one hand, the ANC, as I've said before, cannot have a 65% government on a 39% budget. It just doesn't have the power to dictate South African politics because it doesn't have the numbers anymore. So to give the DA crumbs is actually to misread the situation and misread how much power the DA actually has. The DA is now half the size of the ANC in the electorate. Just a bit more, actually. And in a place like Gauteng, the DA is actually catching up to the ANC and is hot on the ANC's heels. I think the ANC has 34% and the DA has 37%. So it's unfair, quite frankly, for the ANC to try and govern like it has a majority when it just doesn't. But on the other hand, the DA only has 22%. So they also don't deserve to be able to really govern the country, or even to have a veto over what a majority of the country wants to decide. So even though the ANC needs the DA, and the ANC must realize that, the DA also has to realize that to some extent, even though it may be fair in terms of the GNU agreement, it isn't fair for them to have as much power as they want to have. Now, I can completely understand, on the other hand, why the DA is negotiating so hard, right? And the ANC is negotiating so hard, because the job of a political party is to try and get as much power as they can. And the DA is completely right to turn around and say to the ANC, we're not just going to accept crumbs and, be window dressing for what is ultimately an ANC government. We want a real say, and we want to be able to make a real change. So I completely get that, but that needs to be looked at against the backdrop of the DA's wider position in the electorate as a whole, and the fact that only 2 in 10 voters actually believe in DA policy itself. So we've got those mutually irreconcilable visions at the moment, and it'll be interesting to see to what extent they can come together over the next few days, weeks, and possibly even months. As far as the foundational principles are concerned, there isn't much to be said. Like I'll go through some of them, but I'll just demonstrate to you that they don't really mean much. So the ANC says the foundational principles of this coalition are the Constitution and the rule of law. What does that mean? I mean, the rule of law is one of the most notoriously difficult things to actually define. Legal scholars exercise their minds. There are books and books stretching over centuries and centuries that try to define the rule of law. Ultimately, the best definition of the rule of law that I have seen is that no matter how powerful you are, the law is always more powerful. But the ANC doesn't seem to subscribe to that idea. The ANC seems to subscribe to there's law for everyone, and then for the really powerful people, there's a different kind of law, especially if they're the president, no matter who the ANC president is. So I'm not so sure that the ANC really subscribes to an idea of the rule of law. The Constitution, okay, but this coalition wants to change the Constitution the first minute they get power because they don't like the 14 days thing. So, I mean, it's just not clear if they understand by the Constitution the same thing either. Like the DA's view on the equality clause, in my view, is unconstitutional. So, and then you've got the Patriotic Alliance. Their immigration stance is to suspend the Constitution. So how does the Constitution anchor that position? The Freedom Front Plus, is Orania constitutional? I don't think so, by the way. And certainly trying to further entrench a segregated slice of South Africa is just unconstitutional in my view. So this idea that the Constitution unites these parties, I think, is on extremely shaky ground. And that's just one. I mean, I could go through all of these, but they're just vague. They don't mean much. It's a fog of words. And it's clear that very little actually does unite this coalition. So having said that, here's another worry of mine, and something that I think we all need to keep a close eye on as observers and citizens. If this is going to be a taste of what's to come, then we could have a government that is just incapable of making decisions. So far, the parties can't even decide how to decide. And there are going to be big tests ahead for this government. Tests like the NHI, tests like foreign policy, tests like transformation and the next level of transformation and how that agenda gets advanced. Tests like land reform. And then there are going to be tests that we can't even imagine right now. Like, who would have thought that there would be a pandemic when Cyril Ramaphosa's first government came to power? 5 years in a world this complex will throw up complex problems that this government needs to be able to resolve and solve, problems that we can't even foresee right now. How will this coalition make those decisions? And how will it be fast and agile enough to make the decisions in time? And I'm worried that what this period has shown us as we wait to see when a government might be formed and no one tells us anything and no one gives us a deadline on anything, is that this could be typical of what we see anytime the government has a big decision to make. There will be behind closed doors meetings, and the ANC will meet the DA, and the DA will meet the ANC, and together they will meet the IFP, and together they will meet the PA, and the PA will then meet the ANC, and then people will go to Twitter and talk across purposes, and nothing will get done. That's the fear. And that's the danger for this government. And that's the worst case scenario that needs to be avoided. And hopefully this government, when it does form, finds a way of making decisions, sticking to them, and moving on to the next issue. Finally, there's an interesting question provincially speaking here. We have also seen that as the cabinet has been delayed, the Gauteng government has been delayed. Now, Gauteng is a fascinating one because, as I said, the ANC and the DA nearly have a similar number of seats. I think the ANC has 27, the DA has 22, and the legislature has 80 seats in total. So those two parties together are a comfortable majority, right? It's nearly around 50 seats or so. So together, those two parties can govern Gauteng. However, because there's this national unity government arrangement, there are two questions that arise. Do national unity partners who have signed on now become part of the Gauteng government? So, for example, the IFP only has one seat in Gauteng, right? There's no reason why they should be in a governing coalition with one seat, right? But because they're in this national unity government, do they then get parachuted into the Gauteng provincial government, where there's a premier and then there are 10 MEC positions? And you can see how the negotiations would be difficult, right? Because there are 10 MEC positions. The DA and ANC are roughly equal. So do you split those 5-5? Or do you split those, say, you give the premier, so that makes it 11. So do you go premier and then 5 ANC, 5 DA, but then you've left out the IFP? Or do you go, okay, ANC gets premier, ANC maybe gets 5 positions, IFP gets 1, and the DA gets 4. But then the DA only has 4 positions out of 11, even though they got a similar number of votes to the ANC. So can you see how the GNU stuff complicates the picture, but also the extent to which the ANC is able to actually give up power complicates the picture? And again, rightly, I'm afraid to say, the DA would be treated unfairly if it just gets like 2 or 3 positions. So you can see, I don't know, I'm not in these negotiations, but just working it out mathematically myself and then thinking of the political implications, you can understand how Gauteng is going to be difficult. Because really, think of it from the ANC's perspective as well, if they give up half of the provincial government, that's a lot of power to give up, right? They should give it up because they only got 1/3, or just over 1/3 of the votes. But it's hard to explain to yourself that you deserve to lose power. And it seems to me that that's the process that ANC leaders are going through. They have not yet reckoned. They're still in denial about the fact that the only way to really have a stable government going forward is for the ANC to sacrifice a serious amount of power. Fam, that's the update from now. I'm sure that there'll be a lot to talk about in the days and weeks ahead. As soon as this cabinet is announced, I'll certainly be back with another video to analyze all of that. Otherwise, expect regular updates on all the twists and turns in this roller coaster ride of a multi-party government coalition negotiation process. By the way, just remember, in terms of this channel, we really appreciate it if you can like. That helps us, be seen by more people. If you can share, that also spreads the channel, especially in your networks and your WhatsApp groups, if you can share it around. And of course, if you can subscribe, we're hoping to get to 200,000 subscribers by the end of this year. That's our next milestone. We're over 120,000 now. So we'd really appreciate your subscription, and remember all the ways to support this channel. Let's keep chatting here and on other social media platforms. Like, share, subscribe, and keep it locked on SMWX. Aye. Fam, you asked for some SMWX merch and we have delivered. I know you're always looking for ways to help support and grow this channel, so why don't you buy yourself an SMWX hoodie? Super comfy, super warm, and you can represent SMWX. You can check the link down below for how to buy your SMWX hoodie and help build and grow this channel so we can bring you more interviews, more analysis, and more educational insights.